Hello, everyone. So, Republicans are trying to destroy the Voting Rights Act of 1965 through two Supreme Court cases that the court is actually hearing today. This is being done by Republicans under the guise of making it seem like they care about making elections more fair or have more integrity. But the reality is they see what just happened in the 2020 election and they seek to limit democracy because their party is not popular enough to run on Trump fascism alone and appeal to a large enough swath of the American public. So the longer they wait, the harder it becomes for them to do what they're trying to do. And this is important because if this is successful, the VRA would provide little to no protection to black and brown voters in this country. America will officially return to its Jim Crow roots and become a nation that allows for a selective usage of democracy. And understand, America cannot, under any circumstances, call itself a democracy if democratic institutions are not being protected and opened, and not just protected, but opened up further to include as many people as possible within the electoral process. So I'm going to read to you all a couple of articles. We're really on one main article and then an excerpt from another article. So this first article is from Mother Jones. All right, this first article is from Mother Jones, and it is titled, Republicans Are Trying to Kill What's Left of the Voting Rights Act. A Supreme Court case from Arizona could neuter the law. And it says here, as you can see, I have several things highlighted. In 2013, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the opinion gutting Section 5 of the VRA of 1965, which required that states with a long history of discrimination had to approve their voting changes with the federal government. That ruling led to a wave of new voter suppression laws in states including Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas. Many of you already are aware of that. So Roberts justified his position by pointing to a continued existence of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, not Section 5, which applies nationwide and outlaws the denial or abridgment of the right to vote on account of race or color. It says, quote, Our decision in no way affects the permanent nationwide ban on racial discrimination in voting found in Section 2, he wrote in Shelby County versus Holder. But now, in the two Supreme Court cases from Arizona that will be heard on March the 2nd, which is today, Republicans are trying to kill what remains of the VRA. Influential Republicans at the state and federal level, including Ted Cruz and Mitch McConnell, in an amicus brief, have asked the court's conservative majority to weaken Section 2 or strike it down altogether. If they succeed, the VRA would provide little to no protection to voters of color facing an onslaught of new GOP voter suppression efforts across the country, where more than 250 bills restricting voting access have been introduced in 43 states in the past 2 months. Then it says here, the GOP's push to weaken Section 2 dates back more than 40 years, and Roberts was a key foot soldier in that effort. So it basically just explains Roberts' history in trying to gut the Voting Rights Act previously, but he failed. And he's back at it again because now he's sitting on the court. It says here, the cases which the Democratic Party brought against the state of Arizona and the Arizona Republican Party concern two voting restrictions passed by the GOP-controlled state legislature: a ban on collecting mail-in ballots and a law throwing out votes cast in the wrong precincts that were struck down by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in January 2020 for discriminating against Native American, Latino, and Black voters. From 2008 to 2016, Arizona threw out more than 38,000 ballots because voters showed up to the wrong voting precinct, even though their votes for statewide offices should still have been valid. Arizona rejected more out of precinct ballots than any other state, a rate 11 times higher than the state with the second most rejections, which is Washington. And then it says something else there at the end. And it says, because the state is much bigger But actually, because the case is much bigger than two relatively obscure voting restrictions in Arizona, Republicans want to turn it into a vehicle to exempt all manner of new voter suppression laws from being struck down under the VRA. Arizona Republicans, including Representative Debbie Lesko, who voted to throw out her state's electoral votes for Joe Biden, are asking the court to rule that, quote, ordinary race neutral regulations of the time, place, and manner of voting do not violate Section 2, end quote. That would give Republicans a free pass to enact new voting restrictions like voter ID laws, cuts to early voting, and voter roll purges that do not explicitly mention race, but in practice disenfranchise voters of color more than white people. And it says here, and 11 Republican senators, including McConnell, Cruz, and Tom Cotton, have asked the court to strike down Section 2 altogether. Essentially, McConnell and his colleagues want Republicans to be able to continue to restrict voting rights unimpeded by the VRA. So that is basically that article right there. And so as you can see, Republicans are doubling down on voter suppression, which should have been predicted by Democrats because they've been doing this for decades already, and there's been a clear increase in voter suppression since 2013. They've gutted Section 5, now they're after Section 2, okay? And that was the one that they claimed, well, hey, you know, Section 2 is the most important one here, but they're trying to get rid of that now. So what is Section 2, you might ask? Let's take a look at that. So as you can see from the Department of Justice's own website, justice.gov, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, I'm just going to read this first sentence. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 prohibits voting practices or procedures that discriminate on the basis of race, color, or membership in one of the language minority groups identified in Section 4 of the Act. And that's pretty much it. Like it says there in the first sentence, it prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or membership of a minority group, and that is what they are trying to gut and get rid of. That's what Section 2 of the VRA protects. We can't just say Republicans want to get rid of Section 2 because it's actually really deeper and a lot more insidious than that. They want to end democracy altogether, as we've already seen several clear cases of this, clear examples of this. This has to be understood by Democrats in Congress because they have to act accordingly. I mean, passing H.R. 1, for instance, should be a layup. So obviously Republicans hate H.R. 1. And so for those of you who don't know, H.R. 1 is for the people, the For the People Act, because that's what many of them railed against at CPAC over the weekend. And there's actually an article. All right, so there's actually an article here from Esquire that I'm not going to read the entire thing, but the title of the article is Trump's Delusional Attacks on H.R. 1 Show How Important This Bill Is. In surveys of a majority of Republican voters support the reforms included in the For the People Act. The House will vote on it this week. So that's good to know. And actually, before I continue, before I started making this video, it actually came out that Cori Bush's law, or the bill that she was trying to get passed in the House, that failed, and that would have given voting rights to people actually serving time in prison. H.R. 1, which I'll show you in a second, H.R. 1 actually addresses felony disenfranchisement, but it doesn't extend it to people who are currently in prison. It applies purely to people who are still disenfranchised after leaving prison, and they just haven't been given their rights back. So I just wanted to put that out there. But this article goes over basically how Trump and Republicans attacked H.R. 1 during CPAC because they know that it's a nail in their coffin. That everything that I've been saying up until this point, they actually say on the record. That Trump has said several times that mail-in ballots are going to end the Republican Party. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. Today, even I saw on Twitter the Republican lawyers, representing the side in Arizona, the Republican side in Arizona, they're arguing that they need voter suppression to remain viable. And so that's pretty much the gist of this article here. It mentions here that Trump wasn't alone. There were other people at CPAC that attacked it, and they're tying it in honestly to the big lie, because I'm having my phone go off. They're tying it into the big lie because their agenda is to delegitimize the electoral process in America in general. So you guys should definitely take a look at this article here. But before I end the video, I do also want to make you aware of this article from Brennan Center for Justice. It is titled The Annotated Guide to the For the People Act of 2021. And really take your time to go through this, okay? Because there's a lot here. There's a whole lot here. It talks about modernizing voter registration, restoring voting rights. It talks about the VRA. It talks about DC statehood and territorial rights of giving federal voting rights to people in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, ending gerrymandering. There's a lot here. There's a whole lot here. And I say this because I've seen people attacking HR 1 all of a sudden. Now that the House Democrats are going to take it up, and it's possible this might get passed. It's not going to pass without the filibuster. I'll get into that in a second. But now that this is a legitimate possibility, I'm now seeing people attack this. So, which I find very interesting, especially coming from people on the left. Now, does it go nearly as far as it should go? No, it doesn't. And actually, I mentioned earlier the felony disenfranchisement. Let me see if I can find it. Where was that at? Here we go. Democracy restoration. So as you see here, this would guarantee federal voting rights for citizens with past felony convictions who have completed any term of incarceration. And it requires states to inform citizens of their restored voting rights in writing. So, like I said earlier, Cori Bush's bill would have been better than this, because it would have applied to people who are actually currently serving. So, unfortunately, it didn't get passed, but hopefully this will get passed. So, here's my take on all of this. The Democrats are not going to get Senate Republicans to vote with them on this, on HR 1 or any voting rights legislation. It's not going to happen. Okay? They're going to need a simple majority by getting rid of the filibuster. I keep saying this in multiple videos over and over and over again, but the solution really is that simple. If they can't do this, then it's already over. Okay? Anything that happens from now until 2022 is being done largely for show. If they can't get voting rights legislation passed, it would be the DNC effectively ceding to Republican domination and allowing the destruction of American democracy. I don't know how else to make it more plain than that. They'll have Nancy Pelosi come out and pretend to be in some resistance when Republicans take back control of the House, but it'll largely be performative, right? And we all know this. Now, I'm less worried about the House. Okay, because HR 1 has already passed the House. I'm less worried about the House than I am the Senate. But to be honest with you, after watching Cori Bush's bill fail, I'm wondering if I should be worried about the House, because let's not forget, HR 1 passed originally back when the Democrats didn't control the Senate and didn't control the presidency. So you could make the argument that it was largely performative back then anyway. But now now that they're in power, we're going to have to actually see how easy it even passes the House. But the Senate is really where the fight is. The fight against conservative Democrats who run defense for the GOP. Okay, HR 1, like I said, should be a layup. It should be easier to pass than even a $15 an hour minimum wage or $2,000 stimulus checks, because it doesn't involve money, right? And corporate America doesn't lose anything, at least not directly. by stronger voting rights and stronger voting rights laws. So there is no financial incentive for Democrats not to pass it with a simple majority. So whether or not that will get done in Congress will say a lot about Biden's first term and how his first term will play out. If they can't do this bare minimum, then we're in for a GOP House in 2022, and maybe even a GOP controlled Congress entirely. Like they'll be back in complete control of Congress soon because Democrats are choosing to be feckless on certain issues. One last thing, before I end this video. HR 1 is a truly great piece of legislation. Very rarely do I rave about legislation, but it is really, really good. So like I said, I really highly advise you guys to take a look at that Brennan Center for Justice write-up, where they go into a lot of details about what's actually in it. Like I said, it does not go far enough in terms of campaign finance laws, in terms of even when it comes to like the Voting Rights Act and restoring Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. They kind of talk around it. Like they say things like we in HR 1 they reaffirm their commitment to restoring HR 1, which is not the same thing as Section 5 being restored. So they're talking around certain things, beating around the bush about certain things, but what's in it in terms of what is actually abolished or gutted or limited is significant, right? And I think in the face of what Republicans are doing right now across the country, passing these voter suppression laws, the response has to be swift and it has to be strong. So Congress needs to pass HR 1. Joe Biden needs to sign it as is. The only way anything should be taken out in this bill is to make it better, is to make it stronger. Nothing should be watered down because they don't need to do that. There's no reason why they should cut anything out of this bill other than to help Republicans. Because like I said, there are no financial incentives. Corporate America doesn't gain anything from that. So they're only doing it to help Republicans if they water HR 1 down. So just keep that in mind. But my name is Brian Lewis. Make sure you like this video, share, and subscribe. So make sure you follow me on Twitter @_BlackIntellect.